Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Waking Up in Daily Life, Conversations on Consciousness, Creativity, and Community. I'm Albert Flynn DeSilver, and thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. I really appreciate it. If you can take a minute to share about these interviews, you can hit the like button and subscribe. That really helps us keep bringing these incredible interviews to you. And today, I am so completely delighted and excited to be talking with Tami Simon, the one and only Tami Simon, who is the founder of Sounds True of Publishing, which since 1985, I think has published more than 6,000 titles, audio books, courses. She is the author of The Self-Acceptance Project and Being True. Welcome, Tami Simon.
Nice to be with you. Wonderful to be with you again.
This is so fun. I'm really excited to talk to you because it's just particularly exciting to sort of interview the interviewer and kind of see what it, I mean, I've been watching a few of your interviews. It's not like you never get interviewed, but it's sort of fun to me since I had the great pleasure of being on Insights at the Edge. And you know, I did dozens and dozens and dozens of podcast interviews after the book came out, and yours was really by far the most, it was the most comprehensive, sort of emotionally. You know, you really ask these really wonderful, hard questions, and I love the way that you're so committed to getting at the truth, like cutting out all the BS and really asking people to show up for their listeners and their readers. And so I just wanted to kind of thank you for that. And thank you in general for bringing this incredible wellspring of spiritual information to all of us, you know, over the past since 1985, however many years, I'm not good with numbers, but 30 something years. And so with that, you know, I kind of wanted to begin a little bit with the fact that you've interviewed everybody from the Dalai Lama to Eckhart Tolle to Pema Chodron to Roshi Joan Halifax. And I'm wondering if we can begin with, like, what is there an essence? Is there one thing that you've pulled away from all these different interviews with incredible spiritual teachers who are coming from very different traditions and religious backgrounds and so forth? And I'm just wondering if there's kind of one essence that you have learned from all these.
Sure. Well, I think maybe I'd say there's one capacity that I've developed, which is to be very respectful of a truth that seems absolutely contradictory to another truth that I also feel a deep respect for, and to take each person and their world on its own terms and enter it, like actually enter it with them and find out what's going on. What do they mean by certain words or certain states? And don't assume that people mean the same thing. So for example, as part of the title of this series, you use the phrase waking up. And that was one of the phrases I realized that people use in very different ways. They mean really different things by it, and that's okay. And I got curious about it, and I did a series where I interviewed 30 different spiritual teachers and poets waking up. What does it really mean? And the interesting thing was that you ready for this, Albert? I got 30 different answers. I actually did. I got 30 different answers.
Yeah.
So, and now you're asking me, what's like the one thing that you can piece together from all of these different people? And I would say it's to respect people's experience on its own terms and to try to enter it and understand them. And in doing so, we become people who can hold more and more perspectives. And I do think that's a kind of intelligence that we can develop, which is the intelligence of being really multi-perspectival as people and able to say, oh, that's an interesting perspective, that's an interesting perspective, that's an interesting perspective. And then most importantly, let me share with you my perspective. But recognize that your perspective is one more. It's one more, and you get to own it, and you get to claim it, and you get to celebrate it.
That's beautiful. And so does that in any way negate this concept of a truth, or the truth, that which makes perspective possible, that which makes love possible, that which makes being possible?
I don't know. I mean, I feel in a way that you're asking a question that might be above my pay grade or something. No, I mean, I'm serious. I'm serious. Meaning, sounds true is called sounds true because the notion of being truthful and discovering what is true is so important to me. It's so precious to me. But in terms of saying, like, so here's the one non-negotiable truth that we can all look at and agree to. I don't know. I would be nervous about putting myself in a position like that to make a proclamation. What I feel is that I'm on a truthful journey of discovery, and that many truths continue to be discovered. And I'm not hanging my hat anywhere. So that's a truth.
Interesting.
That's interesting, is to be willing to stay with something like openness, possibility, pure potential, non-reference points as what's true. To be willing to take the open space as what's true versus this theoretical framework, and I put all my chips on it. I put my chips on openness.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of your chips, I'm curious about Tami Simon and the concept of Tami Simon, right? Like the ego presentation of Tami Simon.
Are you really interested? Are you really interested in that, Albert? Because I'm not. I really am not. But we can talk about it. I mean, I guess I'm a little interested.
Well, no, that's the non-interest is interesting, if you know what I mean. Like, because you have to, especially, I mean, everybody has to do this, but especially as a public person, as a person who is a publisher, a disseminator of information, you have to get up every day and reconstruct in an instant this ego creature that is Tami Simon. And I'm just kind of curious how you work with that, in sort of spiritual terms.
Right. Well, there's an assumption in what you're saying.
Of course.
And the way that you said it. Well, whenever we open our mouth, we are sharing our assumptions. But the assumption that I have to reconstruct it. Other people are constructing it. Other people are constructing it all the time. And they're projecting God knows what. But what's my role? Could I be in my unconstructedness as a human and allow life to express through me, to speak through me, to create through me, to relate through me, to manage scheduling through me, to handle responsibilities through me? Yeah, I could. And then I have to deal with other people's projections. And their projections are of a constructed self. And I feel those projections and I sense them. And, quite honestly, I find it a little draining. And I don't know, it makes me, you ready for this? It makes me want to fart. There you go. It makes me want to take all my clothes off or something and freak them out. That's what actually is going on inside, because I don't know. It's kind of just tiresome.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's so beautiful to hear. Could I be my own unconstructed self, is what I think I heard you say. Yeah. That's such a brilliant question, because I know, as I think about this in my own terms, it's like, oh, right. I have to keep reminding myself. I don't know if this is true for you, but it's like a constant reminder, because of the barrage of external projections from other people, but also from, the CNN and NPR and whatever other media that we're listening to or watching, or a book that we're reading. It could be anything. Any of that external information is constantly it kind of almost, depending on where you're at in your head, is inviting you to reaffirm the ego, this idea that we have
Well,
of
let's
ourselves.
question that. Why are you saying that? Why is that true?
Perhaps that's just my baggage, but I'm wondering
Right.
in your experience.
Well, what I notice is I've had to learn to be sensitive in certain situations. So for example, in a meeting, I'm the boss. I carry more power than anyone else in the room.
Right.
I have to be aware of that. I can't just be the grizzly bear that I am on the inside. I have to be aware that there are politics in the situation, and that people's projections on me as the boss means a lot. And I have to be mindful of that and aware of that. So yeah, but when I'm watching CNN, that's fine. I'm just taking it in. I don't have to be in anything.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, how that affects, or whether, how much of the stuff that we take in goes in subconsciously, how much of it, affects our perceptions of the world in terms of our ability to stay in some sense state of equanimity and balance and wakefulness.
Yeah.
Okay. I was mentioning about your interviewing style, and love how you sort of not push in a negative way, but encourage, tease out, maybe is a better phrase,
Right.
kind of the essence of their approach and how they're able to communicate, to the person that is most resistant or most confused. And because people are at all levels of receptivity to spirituality and what that means. And so is that kind of are you speaking to any particular, in terms of Sounds True as a whole, are you speaking to the new initiate of spirituality? Are you speaking to the sort of general human? Or is that really anything that you think about in terms of audience or who you're trying to communicate with?
Sure. Well, at this point, Sounds True, 37 years. I thought I'd do the math for you there.
Thank you.
37 years later, it's not just me, it's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a whole editorial acquisitions team, and we have a whole digital acquisitions team. And there are a lot of different creators and creative voices who want to speak to a lot of different people who are at different places on their growth journeys. It could be a spiritual growth journey. It could be a journey around health and healing or psychological development. It could be all kinds of things. So I'm not the only person who's selecting programs and putting them out. Now, when I interview someone, what I'm trying to do, to the best of my ability, is enter their world and bring out the best medicine they have for others. Like that's what I'm trying to do. And this word medicine, it's a strong metaphor, but I think that teachers and writers, they have medicine. They have something they've discovered that has really helped them, and they feel called. They want to share that. Okay, so I feel like my job is let's go in and get that, and let's bring it to the people who it would actually serve. And that could be a lot of different people depending on the person and what their medicinal offering is. Yeah,
that's beautiful. I hope I do some version of that today. We'll see. Here's a question about the overload of information. And I'm curious if you ever worry about that, because here we are in this sort of infotainment industrial complex. And it's sort of like in some ways taking over our brains in this cycle of constant, almost addiction. We almost have an addiction to information. And is there ever, I guess my question is there ever enough do we ever get enough spiritual information, or do we ever
Right.
get enough cheese doodles?
Sure. Well, I guess that would be a question I think each one of us has to answer for ourselves. And so versus like me sitting out there like, oh, sounds true, publishes a lot of information. Are we just adding to the, I don't think that way. I
Mhm.
want to publish the highest quality and I trust it will go. And we put a lot of energy to help it go, to help it reach people who will benefit from it. Now, I think each one of us has to find out what's our diet like.
Mm.
What's your diet of cheese doodles? What's your vegetable diet? What's your fasting diet to let your system reset itself? Where are you? What do you need? Is it time for that ice cream sundae with hot fudge? I had one of those last week and it was so good. It was
Yes.
exactly what I
Yes.
wanted.
Yeah.
It was a special evening,
Right.
and it was half cookies and cream and it was half coffee ice cream with I loved it. But
Yeah.
it's a special treat. I don't do it that often.
Yeah.
But it really, okay, so where are you with your consumption? Are you in quiet enough to hear yourself?
Mm.
Or do you need some more of that? Do you need a full period of time where you and your digital devices are not in the same room together? Do you
Mhm.
actually secretly hunger for that? Do you know that would be the nourishment that you need? And can you give it to yourself? So I think we each have to get in touch with, am I getting the kind of information in the right doses that I need?
Mhm.
And if not, if I'm just in some addictive spin, am I willing to let that go? It'd be like if I were having those ice cream sundaes, every day of the week for
Right.
God knows how long. I mean, I can tell you it wouldn't be good for my health. I mean, I
Right.
know that about myself. I
Mhm.
know that. And so if we feel we're in an addictive spin with information, then we have to have the clarity and the courage to take some time away from input and listen to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I heard you describe yourself as a seeker at one time in your young life,
Yeah, I think that's
as you
fair.
were creating. And would you still consider yourself a seeker?
Yes and no. The word seeker, it's a word, and I'll tell you what I like about it, and I'll tell you what I don't like about it
Great.
as a word to describe myself right now. Or other people may resonate with this. A seeker means that there's something they don't have
Hmm.
that they want.
Right.
And there's a quality of even being kind of lost. And like I'm seeking, I'm looking, and so what I don't like about it, the word, is that I now know at this point in my life that what I need, what is ultimate, what really matters, what really is of value is right here.
Hmm.
It's in this moment in our experience. And I know that. So I'm not looking out there. I'm not looking for a book to tell me to come inside and connect. No, I mean, I know it's right here. It's found. It's found. What I like about the word seeker and why I would continue to say, yeah, I'm a seeker, is that I always find something new. I'm always learning something new. I always
Hmm.
have my eyes open for
Yeah.
that next growth, that next learning, that next discovery, that next aha. Yet I also feel found at the same
Mm.
time.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, particularly in our culture, tend to hop around. There's the whole spiritual materialism concept. They go and they try Shambhala for a while, and then they're like, well, that was okay. And then they'll go to Zen, and they're like, well, Zen, that was fun, but a little too, whatever. And then they kind of hop to different teachers. And that can either be a process of dissatisfaction, or it can be a process of discovery and learning. Um, so what I'm hearing
Yeah.
from you is that it's both and, although
For me,
maybe you're
it
not so
is.
much
And
seeking. And
well, I think so. There's a couple things you said. This notion of hopping. hopping around here, hopping around there. I think the question is, at any point, are you going deep, not necessarily into the tradition, into
Right.
yourself,
Yes.
into
Yes.
yourself,
Mhm.
or the moment when it gets hard, the
Mhm.
moment when you have to really confront something about you and confront early patterning, or to use your word, construction, ways that your ego self was constructed early in your life that you just, I'm not going there.
Mm.
If you are looking at a spiritual path and you're just popping off of it without actually
Mm.
doing the inner work of that journey, and in the process avoiding your inner work for decades, that's not going to get you anywhere.
Mm.
On the other side, if you're going in and you're saying, I found something really useful. This is so important to me. Okay, good. And I'm really genuinely curious about this. And you're finding something and it's getting deep into your root system. I respect that. And
Mhm.
I think that a lot of times when people are critical of that kind of activity, it's because they want people to be their disciple or to follow their path or to stay true to
Right.
the lineage, or to basically to control and own you and
Right.
put you on their path. And I don't think that's the future. I think the future is discovering something. A woman that I have a great respect for, Sounds True author Carolyn Mace, who's a
Mm.
medical intuitive, she calls it organic divinity. And
Mm.
that there isn't
Mm.
any, she says, there's no religious tradition that could contain her. She was
Uh-huh.
too big for any of them.
I
And I
love it.
like that
Yes.
idea that we actually can't be contained. Now, you also brought up this notion of spiritual materialism, and I just want to connect a dot here, if it's okay, because
Please, please.
people sometimes think that that phrase spiritual materialism means reading a lot of books or listening to a lot of audio or going to a lot of classes or retreats, like a materialistic view, like then I'll go here, then I'll go there.
Right.
To me, what it really means is that you've decided that there is territory, there's an answer, there's a materialistic landing place for you.
Mm-hmm.
This whole notion I said about hanging your hat somewhere,
Right.
like
Right.
that's the ultimate materialistic view, is to say, I found it and I'm done.
Yeah.
And guess what? I'm perfect. Right? Can't you tell? Doesn't
Yeah.
everybody know that? Don't talk to my wife or the
Yeah.
people that I work with.
Right.
But I'm just going to tell you, I found this thing
Yeah.
and I'm done now. I've completed the process and there's perfection.
Mm.
That to me is the ultimate kind of materialism, because
Right.
you're putting a period at the end of what is an ever evolving process, an
Yeah.
ever unfolding process.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I would, of course, advise against that type of materialism and let yourself keep growing and discovering.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I remember reading or maybe listening to, most likely a Sounds True product of Adyashanti's, in which he talked about waking up from Zen.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind, just the notion, like, wait, I thought Zen was how you woke up. And he woke up from Zen, as if like into another thing. So
Sure.
I love that. I'm curious what that means to you.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I've had the opportunity to talk to Adyashanti a bit about this. He's someone I deeply love
Yeah.
and respect. And I was like, well, Adya, you woke up from Zen, but you also woke up through Zen, both.
Right.
You spent 14 years as a Zen meditator, and that practice was really important to you. And you did it for hours and hours and hours and hours. And
Yeah.
then, you woke up through it to be from it. And I think that's what they mean by the phrase, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill the Buddha, like this notion that,
Right.
or, there's a lot of classical teachings on this. You take a raft to get to the other side, but then you don't keep carrying the raft on your back once you're on the other side. And,
Yeah.
I think that, practices and traditions and formats and teachers, they can be so helpful It's simply when they have, if at some point, and maybe they don't, but if they exhaust their utility at a certain point, be willing to let them go.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Have you been on a Adyashanti, 6 or 7 or 8 day retreat?
I have. It was quite a while ago, but I
Yeah.
have been on one.
Yeah. The simplicity is alarming in a good way.
Do you want to describe what happens at one of the retreats for your viewers?
Well, I'm sort of more interested in what happens for you, and because it's there's a lot of meditation traditions that are like, you have to do this and then you do this and then you do that. But what happens on an Adyashanti retreat, my experience, and I want to hear what your experience was, is that it's just held with a kind of simplicity of you really being with yourself and showing up like, here's the container and you're confronted with yourself. What's there? But
Well,
I'm curious what happened for you.
Yeah, well, I can share a little bit about my retreat experience, but I think the interesting thing here is this notion of being with ourselves,
Mhm.
really being with ourselves. You don't need to go on a retreat to do that, although going on a retreat can amplify that experience. But I think we can look at what are we doing in our lives to avoid being with ourselves.
Mhm.
Like, we all know it. We all know what we do
Right.
to avoid being with ourselves. And then what's it like when you really drop in and you really have that feeling of just the pure joy of being alive, just
Mhm.
feeling and relishing your breathing and the taste of food and the color of light and the feeling of air when you walk outside.
Mhm.
It's amazing. So we can all have that anytime. Now, when I went and on an Adyashanti retreat, what I realized was I liked a lot the being with myself part, and I liked going on walks. I actually didn't enjoy when he worked with other people. People would come and he'd spend like 45 minutes working with someone in an
Mhm.
inquiry process. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of other people benefited from that and learned from the person's process, but I didn't really like that part. The part that was super meaningful to me was Adya's instructions around, for example, feeling yourself as if you were alive from the neck down. So I love,
Mhm.
it's a very simple
Yeah.
instruction.
Yeah.
Feel your aliveness from the neck down.
Mhm.
And, so that's the kind of practice that for me is very meaningful. And then I would go on these beautiful walks outside and
Yeah.
focus on that.
Yeah. I agree. I never really liked the inquiry bits either. I love the meditation and being
Easy
with
for us to say we're not leading retreats. We can criticize Adya's retreats. Some of the deepest experiences humans can have. But
Yeah,
yeah,
right. But for some of us, it's that sitting with ourselves is really terrifying, right? Like, because in the silence, at least in my experience, I wonder if this is true for you, especially when you initially come to meditation experience and just sitting with yourself and being in silence. It's not just the unicorns and daisies, right? There
sure.
oftentimes anxiety arises, terror arises, strong images from
Sure.
our past arise. And can you talk a little bit about that in your
Sure.
experience?
Well, I think that's inner work.
Mhm.
That's inner work.
Yeah.
Inner work is being with whatever is arising in our experience in an honest way and coming to a place where we can welcome it. And we welcome it as the truth of this moment. And I can share a couple of capacities that have been really, really, really helpful to me in terms of doing inner work.
That'd
One
be
is,
fabulous.
so 3 come to mind right away. One is feeling the support of the earth. So
Mm,
feeling the support of ground,
mm,
of gravity, that I am not just like floating around, there's, no, but like I can feel in this moment the heaviness of my sits bones, my feet on the floor. I can feel, and this is the key, supported. I'm supported. We're all supported.
Yeah.
So you're not just this anxious whatever without any support anywhere. We always have support available to us, and we can connect to it simply by giving in with the weightedness in our body and feeling ourselves drop a little bit. And even on the exhale, there's a relaxation and a releasing just on the natural exhale. It doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to do some fancy practice. You're just breathing out,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you're letting go, and you're feeling the support that's here. So that's one. Now, the second big capacity that helps me be with myself, regardless of what's happening, is to open space in the belly. And often what I feel is I actually like drop my mind, like it's up in my head, and I'm like, blah, 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 all that. Just take the whole thing and put it inside the belly, like a big Buddha belly. And just imagine, so I'm physically dropped, and now there's this huge belly that can contain everything. And I like to breathe into my belly, and as I'm breathing in, I can feel the belly expand. And so it expands to the back and to the sides and the front and down on the pelvic floor. And I just let myself have this huge belly. And then on the exhale, it kind of shrinks, like sometimes I imagine it's like a balloon. And I do this sometimes, like if I go into a meeting and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to hold a lot in this meeting. And that happens, it's like I'm gonna have to hold this person's frustration and this person's anger and this person's not so great ideas and the whole thing, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, do I have space in my belly for this? And I sit there and I imagine my belly. First of all, I get heavy. So I first do that because that's important. Feel support. Then I imagine my belly, big inhale. Okay. And then the third capacity, and this, I think, is actually a game changer for any of us when it comes to working with the kinds of difficult experiences you named, anxiety and other kinds of inner challenges, is self-compassion. And you mentioned in the beginning the self-acceptance project. And at one point, I became really, really interested in this topic of self-acceptance and self-compassion. And I interviewed 30 different experts on it because this is what happens when I get really interested. And I got interested because I saw at the time I was teaching meditation and that I had these one-on-one interviews with people. And what I saw is that people were judging themselves for everything. They were sitting on the cushion and they were judging themselves for sitting on the cushion wrong. They were judging themselves for what they said when they were finally allowed to speak at the retreat for an hour, for the things that they said to the person in the lunch line that they shouldn't have said, and what they said at the mic, and on and on and on. And I was like, oh my God, we're torturing ourselves. So many of us are torturing ourselves. And so I really wanted to understand self-acceptance and self-compassion. And also as a very driven person, which I am, someone who's always been quite a high achiever, I knew the voice inside me that would punish myself if I felt like I fell short of something I wanted to accomplish historically. And what I learned about self-compassion, and this is terrific, is that it's a skill like anything else. And it's actually not that hard to learn. That's the miracle. It's not that hard to learn. You think it's like, I thought it was some mythic holy grail and, you had to be this illuminated soul. No, actually, it's a practice. And, the first step, you can change your physiology. So your physiology of fight and flight and, oh my God, I'm going to crack the whip and punish you for this thing, simply by being kind to yourself and like touching your own hand or your own arm or touching your heart or touching your face. Really powerful to do that, even though it looks a little bit like, oh my God, really? Well, you're by yourself. You're lying on the couch and you feel like SHIT. You can do it. Touch yourself on your face. And suddenly you've moved into what Kristen Neff, whom I learned this from, she calls it the tend and befriend system inside of our body. instead of the fight, flight, freeze system. So we've actually moved into a different physiological state. And in the tend and befriend state, we can say something nice to ourselves. And we can just say something like, hey, Tami, you're going through a really hard time, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you know, and suddenly it's like you're befriending yourself. And that's the key idea. When we learn how to befriend ourselves, we can start coming closer to ourselves, and we start developing a kind of confidence that we can be with whatever's happening, even really extreme states of mind and extreme states of emotional suffering. We've got these capacities to befriend ourselves.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I hope you're all taking notes. You can always listen to this again, but that's absolute gold right there. These capacities and tending to ourselves with loving kindness is so essential. And I think many of us forget. I know I forget. I do, going back to the Adyashanti thing for a minute, I remember being on one of his retreats and being up at 3 a.m, completely just filled with energy, you know, super anxious, like I'm losing my mind, like I don't feel safe, like blah, 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 you know, and having to go into this little mini redwood grove and do exactly that. Like feel my feet on the ground, you know, push the energy down, ground in my belly, and just reconnect to this being and come back to the body.
Yeah.
So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And speaking of difficult situations, I'm curious if you would be willing to describe, since you've done so many interviews and had so many experiences with various spiritual teachers, I'm curious if you'd be willing to describe or tell us a little anecdote of a botched interview, one that went south, where things just kind of went off the rails.
Sure. Well, I'll first share with you something I learned, and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, because I don't mean it that way, but I prepare for every interview that I do. I prepare.
That's beautiful.
I prepare pretty well, actually. And I would say it usually takes me between 2 and 4 hours to prepare for an interview. And that's what I need to feel like I have my legs under me when I go in to talk to someone and I'm familiar. And if remember I said I'm going to enter their world. And when it doesn't work, I used to be like, God, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. And if only. And then I started seeing that I'm actually pretty consistent. I'm actually consistent as an interviewer. I come, I'm prepared, I'm ready to roll. And when it doesn't work, it's often because the person I'm interviewing was not in a good space. And there was something also potentially about the way I prepared that didn't match what they really wanted to talk about. So there was like a mismatch of some kind. And what I'll do afterwards is I'll say to the person, I don't think that showed you and brought, to go back to our metaphor, brought the most of your medicine out to as many people as possible. I would like to do better. And I learned some things about how I could do a better job of evoking your wisdom in retrospect after the interview. And I wonder if you'd be open to doing it again. And almost always people say, sure.
Yeah.
They say, sure, I'd be happy to do it again. And then I'll say, can I share with you some of the things I thought of that might be better? Do you have any feedback from me that might be better? And I have a couple thoughts for you I'd like to share as well. And then we re-record it, and it's almost always really good the second time.
Yeah. So no situations in which things are live and you get caught off guard.
Oh, well, I mean, there have been errors and things like that. I'm not quite sure. What is it, Albert, that you're driving at? I mean,
well, I'm sort of,
okay. Do you want me to share like a tragedy story? When I was young, and this informed my interest in self-acceptance. And now I'm 22, and I wanted to do a live broadcast of a Soviet American Citizens Summit. Interesting. This was back in 1985, 1986, somewhere in there. It was a radio broadcast live on National Public Radio stations.
Mm.
We had about 50 stations who agreed to broadcast this Citizen Summit live.
Wow.
And there was a translation feed. We're at a conference center in Washington, D.C., where the Russian citizens who were sharing their perspective were going to be translated into English. And there was a translator there so that the USA listeners could understand what's happening. And the translation feed was not hooked up properly. So I hosted an hour-long live broadcast, and about 20 minutes of it was in Russian.
Wow.
With no translation feed. And I found out about it afterwards. And, someone who was there said, well, you should never try to be talent and a producer at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were right. But I was also 21, 22, and I was trying to do this good thing, but I felt terrible. I felt terrible. I went back into the hotel room at the conference center where I was, and is this the kind of story you want to hear? And I got into bed and I put the covers over me and I was just like, I want to die.
Right.
I want to die right now.
Wow.
But of course, after 3, 4, 5 hours, I ordered room service, probably a whole pizza, all for me. And then I got back into the covers and was like, I want to die.
Yeah.
And then, I woke up the next day and I said, okay, so I learned some lessons here. If I was going to do, this is how we would divide responsibilities. This is how we would test things in advance. And I kept going. And I said, I don't want to do live broadcasting for a while because I was so traumatized by the experience. I want to pre-record things and make sure that they're done really right. And after a period of time passed, then I was like, I'm ready to do live broadcasting again. And I have a whole team around me and I want to try this. And went ahead, and now we do things live all the time, of course.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for that. I want to switch gears here a little bit. Many of our listeners are writers, they're creatives with spiritual stories, adventures, transformations. And I'm curious if I can ask you, if it's okay to ask you, what makes a story or an idea in this realm publishable in your mind?
Sure. Does it help people? Does it change them?
Mm-hmm.
What's the transformational outcome for the reader or the learner? So I think a lot of times people focus on their expression and the craft and originality and beauty of their expression. But what I like to focus on is how is the reader going to be, or the listener going to be different? How are they going to live their lives differently? Because those are the programs and the books that people really cherish.
Right. And of course, that's very subjective, right? So how do you, as a publisher, or your team, really get a sense that Mary's extremely powerful, crazy, dramatic experience of transformation is any better or more communicative than Jeremy's?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple things. One, there is the team approach. So it's not any one person.
Yeah.
And often it's interesting to hear from people, what did you learn? How did it change you? Just hear how people answer that question. The other thing, and as you know, this is a huge part about publishing today, is that we're not only looking at what our internal team thinks, we're looking at an author's quote unquote platform. And you can say a lot of things about what you think about a platform, but the larger platform a person has, that means that a larger number of people have said, oh my God, I got a lot out of this person. I got so much out of working, studying, reading this person that I want to be part of this person's YouTube channel and keep hearing more from them, and because I'm inspired by them. And so a publishing company is also not just making waves, but riding a wave. And it's a combination of those two things.
And what is your edge right now as a publisher?
Well, I feel as a person, and this means as a it relates to our publishing program at Sounds True and a lot of the projects we're doing at Sounds True, and it relates to my life in general. It really feels like a continual letting go.
Mm. Mm.
And what I mean by that in terms of publishing is I've been thinking about giving up the title publisher and actually passing that on to someone else. I'm 60 this year. I'm letting go of living in Boulder, Colorado, where I've lived for 38 years. And my wife and I and our 2 dogs are moving to British Columbia. And I want to stay very active in the leadership of Sounds True. And I want to give more and more people more and more leadership responsibility as I move into playing the role that I feel the most called to play while elevating others to the maximum degree.
That's beautiful. And finally, I'm really curious what you're particularly jazzed about or inspired by culturally in sort of human culture these days. There's so much, with war and destruction and viruses and blah, 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 climate. But what jazzes Tami Simon up in terms of inspiration and cultural creation right now?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I mentioned moving to British Columbia.
Yeah.
And Julie, my partner, and I, we've been building a home on an island, Cortez Island, which is north of Vancouver. And
yeah,
the land,
home of hollyhock,
precisely. And I find the land there tremendously elevating, joy producing, inspiring. And I started wanting to really focus on things like, ready? I'm just going to tell you the truth, Albert.
Yes, I want the truth.
This may not be when you said culturally, because I'm not that interested at the moment, truth be told, in human culture. But I'm very interested in things like what the trees have to teach us, what the rocks have to teach us, what whales have to teach us, what high snow-capped peaks have to teach us. So I feel very much that there is a quality of how the earth expresses itself up in British Columbia that I feel called to listen to very carefully and learn from. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm excited to hang out in a kayak, and I probably won't go very far, very fast, but really receive the natural environment and see how that impacts me.
That's beautiful. Really brilliant and lovely. Thank you so much, Tami Simon. It has been an absolute joy to connect with you and to talk with you and just to hear your take and your perspective. And so I thank you so much for being here and being so open and kind.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you.